The Bible says to correct oppression and plead the widow's case. Where 30 years ago, Kurt Ver Beek and his wife founded the organization A More Just Society. From gangs terrorizing the community to a tycoon commanding 1,000 armed men, all the way up to government corruption and police brutality, their efforts have made some of the most violent neighborhoods on earth safer and arguably improved the functioning of a national government. And joining us today all the way from Honduras, we are so glad to welcome Kurt Ver Beek to the show. Kurt, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you, guys. It's great to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. Back in 1986, all the way back in 86, you and your wife, Joanne, I understand you didn't speak Spanish, had never traveled outside the U.S., but right after getting married, you moved to Costa Rica as missionaries. What was your plan? What was going through your mind at that stage in your life?
It sounded like a great adventure, and it was just a 2-year job. So I think initially that was, it was a cool Christian organization we were going to be working with. We were going to help poor people. We understood sort of generally we're going to learn Spanish, but honestly, like we were 21 and 22, just out of college and thought it would be great. We had no idea we were going to be here 45 years later.
Yeah, no idea the plan God had for you and how many lives would be changed. So 2 years later, you go to Honduras. I guess you could say you fell in love with the country. What made you decide to raise your young family? I mean, people need to understand one of the most violent neighborhoods you could possibly have chosen.
Yeah, well, we didn't know that when we moved in there. We knew it was, we had gone to church there for 6 years. And then we had always flirted with the idea of moving there. And then my best friend, Carlos, who we started ASJ with, he moved there first with his kids. And he really liked it. And that sounded like, again, an adventure that we should try. So we kind of did the same thing. We said, we'll do this for 2 years and see how it goes. And we're still there 26 years later.
Was your original vision far short of what ultimately happened, which we're going to talk about, the things you took on? Was your vision a little short-sighted looking back for what you were going to do?
Probably yes and no. So I think both Carlos and I have always been visionaries, so we have these big ideas. I think we also always knew we probably wouldn't do them, like clean up the country of corruption or put presidents in jail was kind of our big ideas at the beginning. But then I think you're right. In lots of ways, what has happened, what God has done through ASJ here in Honduras is like we could have never imagined it.
Yeah, so you have a shift in your perspective a few years in, and you realize, people literally need protection, violence is going on. And you decide to make a change, which takes great courage. I mean, you talk about something a lot of Christians don't have, perhaps, which is bravery. I'm not expecting you to brag on yourself, but you really took on a great deal. Talk about that.
We moved into this poor neighborhood. I think Carlos talks about that was his second conversion, to understand it's one thing to help the poor, but it's another thing to live with them in their neighborhood, go to church with them, have them knocking on your door at 2 a.m. because their son was shot. So that was the sort of stuff that became part of our life. And a lot of things I thought we wouldn't like. And in the end, we really did. But I think things really changed after we had been there a few years. My kids were going to school one morning. They went to the school where Carlos was principal. And they got sent home early, and it ended up that one of their classmates' father had been killed that morning. And he sold fruits and vegetables out of the back of the pickup truck, and he was robbed by 3 guys with ski masks, and they killed him. And so they canceled school. And then 2 days later, the widow went to Carlos's office and said, I know who did it. It's 3 of our neighbors. As they ran away, they took the ski masks off. I have 2 witnesses. And Carlos comes to me and he said, what should we do? And we had this little justice organization. We had a few employees, but we didn't know anybody in the police. We didn't know who we could trust. We were afraid if we went to the police station, those cops would tell the bad guys and we could be hurt. So we ended up trying to call people and make contacts and didn't get very far. And then 2 months later, those three guys were, one was killed and two were caught by the cops. And then Carlos and I were sitting around drinking tea in his living room, and we started talking about those three guys and how evil they were, and we ended up saying, we knew together 13 people who had been killed after we found out who they were. So like we could have, if we would have stopped them, if we could have stopped them that first day we found out, 13 people wouldn't have been killed. And that still feels awful. And so we said, like, what was the problem? Well, the problem was we didn't know who we could trust. We didn't know which cops we could trust. And we thought, what if we hired a Christian ex-cop or a cop who could work for us, and he would know who the good cops were and bad cops were, and the same in the prosecutor's office. And that's what we did. We hired an ex-cop who started basically like a private investigator for poor people. And we ended up finding out we had 52 homicides in this neighborhood, one a week, of about 35,000 people. And 3 years later, we had 8. So people had stopped having church services at night. Young girls wouldn't go to high school at night. People had to close their businesses, and all of that stuff came back. Churches had evening services again. So by hiring those 2 people doing this kind of crazy thing, we had transformed our neighborhood.
I want to let people know there's a great new book about your story called Bear Witness. I'll talk about that at the end again. How did you battle fear? We talked at the top of this show about when God calls us to do what we seem to think is impossible. I mean, you were making a lot of dangerous people furious at the work you were doing in the name of justice. How did you handle the fear factor you must have been facing? Or did you not face that?
Yeah. So maybe 2 things. Like, one of the things we talk a lot about is we are trying to challenge ourselves and others to be brave Christians. And when you look at the life of the prophets, the life of Jesus, the life of the apostles, like, hard to not put brave in one of the top 5 adjectives, right, for how they lived. But I think if you go out on the street, wherever you guys are, in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and if you ask people to describe Christians, or even ask Christians to describe themselves, I don't think brave would be in the top 100, probably, adjectives people will use. So I think we're trying to challenge ourselves and other Christians to reclaim that adjective, like, we are called to be brave. And a passage that I love is in 1 John, that perfect love casts out all fear. And I know, like, if my daughter or my son were in danger, like, I would do anything. Like, I would put myself between them and the gang. I think that's the sort of perfect love Jesus is talking about. But I also think that we only live that out with a very few people. So I think the challenge is to try to live like that, not just for our kids, but basically for everybody, for our neighbor.
Yeah, and another thing that may be off the radar of Christians is seeking justice. Micah 6:8 talks about that we are to seek justice. It's important, living as a Christian. Do you think it's something that is not really on the heart of many believers?
Yeah, and then Micah 6:8, but I also love the passage. I wish we would have learned that more in Sunday school, where Jesus goes in the temple and throws over the table, and he made a whip to throw out the money changers. Sort of corruption in Jesus' day clearly made him very angry, and he took action. So yeah, I think it's scary to us, but I think also we don't have models. What we see in the church, have a food pantry or things that are not bad. And I think things that God are called us to live a life of compassion, but we're also to live a life of justice. And that where there is injustice, that means someone is taking advantage of someone. And if you stop that, the person who's taking advantage is going to get mad. So one of my little handy definitions of justice work is if you do justice work, somebody's going to get mad. If nobody's getting mad, you're probably not doing justice work.
Wow. Wow, that is a great takeaway. I want to let people know to be involved with making a difference in Honduras, you can go to asj-us.org. And also, be sure to grab yourself a copy of Bear Witness, The Pursuit of Justice in a Violent Land, and you can learn more about Kurt and his incredible bravery and story. It's available wherever books are sold. Kurt, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much.